So one of the first things I want you to do in your interview guide is plan for how you're going to start the conversation. And this is really thinking about even maybe before you formally begin the interview, but how are you going to get the conversation to warm up? So, how are you going to get the person to talk a little in a way that feels comfortable? You can start here with just asking them how their semester is going. You can ask them if you have a class with them, you can ask them how a class is going, right? Something to just sort of get things started. But plan ahead for this because you don't want to begin an interview and be like, oh, I guess we're going to start, right? So think about how you want to warm up the conversation. And one of the things here is you never want to start with demographic questions. So, it would be just weird to start with, so can you tell me your gender? Can you tell me your race? Right? Those aren't great questions for warming up an interview. Next, I want you to look at your list of questions and see if there are themes you can organize them into. And so look for kind of a few common issues, and this will help you think a little bit about how to guide the flow of the conversation. So, in moving from one topic to another, if you have some like themes in mind, it'll help you group similar questions together. The next thing is that I want you to identify key questions that need to be asked in every single interview. For interviews as short as we're going to be doing for this class, I would say you want to identify no more than 2 or 3 that every single person is going to ask. Everything else on there are optional depending on how the conversation develops. All right. This seems like such a small number. I know. And remember, you're going to plan other questions. So there will be other questions on your list. But, these conversations can go in very different directions. And we want to make sure that we have a set number that everybody's going to ask to help with that comparability issue so that we can look at how the interviews talk about common issues. So you'll identify 3 at most questions that everybody's going to ask. The next thing I want you to do is think about possible follow-up and segue questions. Now, you may have already brainstormed some of these. So, some of the questions, if you wrote like 10 questions, right, and I'm telling you to identify the 3 that are most important, some of those are going to be follow-up questions. But you also want to think ahead about questions that will help you get more information from your interviewee. So, some of my go-to questions are like, oh, can you give me an example? Can you tell me more about that? Sometimes I'll even say something like, well, I think I know what that means, but can you tell me a little more about that? Right? So get the person to give you more information. So that'll help you with follow-ups because sometimes those are really hard to come up with in the moment. So plan them ahead so that you have a few in your pocket you can easily ask. The segue questions are to move you from one topic to another. So if these interviews end up having, maybe 2 themes, you do want to think ahead about how to get somebody who's talking about one theme to transition to talking about the other. And again, this is hard to do smoothly sometimes, so you want to plan ahead so that you have some idea of how you might do that. These interviews may not get too intimate or uncomfortable, but it's possible that they will, especially if somebody is revealing something personal in terms of why they asked for an excuse, right? So if they had like a serious illness or a personal crisis, and, talking about those things is very challenging. And so, you want to think about as you're designing your questionnaire and thinking about your segues and your follow-up questions, you want to think about how if you get into a very intimate topic, how you might transition to something that's a little lighter. as one of your last runs of going over your interview schedule as you're putting it together, I want you to go look at how you can make the wording as conversational as possible. We talked before about avoiding technical language and jargon, but also, you just want questions to like flow naturally as a part of a conversation. So go in and check your wording and look and see if there's ways you can word questions with language that's more relaxed or more informal.